Now we discuss the conditions of accountability. There are two conditions for attributing moral accountability and for determining the degree of one's moral accountability. The attribution of moral accountability to a person for an action that he or she does is a result of two conditions, the intentionality and knowledge. One is that he or she does the action intentionally. That is to say, he or she has the intention of doing the action, and he or she performs the action to carry out the intention. We may refer to this condition as the intentionality condition. The other is that the person knows or is capable of knowing that the action he or she is thinking of or performing is right or wrong, good or bad. We may refer to this second condition as the knowledge condition. Putting these two conditions together, we thus say that a person is accountable for his or her action when he or she performs this action intentionally and he or she knows or is capable of knowing that this action is right or wrong, good or bad. We have this example. Suppose a sniper shoots a person with the intention of killing the person. Since the sniper's act of shooting the person is an intentional action, which he presumably knows to be wrong, he should be accountable for such an act. In particular, he should deserve blame for it. And on the other hand, suppose a security guard, upon seeing this sniper who is about to shoot the person, suddenly decides to save the life of the person by using his body to cover the person. Since this act is clearly intentional and is something that the security guard presumably knows to be right, then he should be accountable for it. He should in particular be praised for doing it. In both cases, the knowledge and intention conditions obtain, and so the attribution of accountability is proper. These two conditions, the intentionality and knowledge conditions, are usually referred to as incriminating conditions, and their opposite as excusing conditions. The excusing conditions are the absence of the two incriminating conditions. The absence of the intentionality condition means the action under consideration is not done intentionally, while the absence of knowledge condition means that the action is done out of ignorance. It must be noted, however, that in the case of the two incriminating conditions, both conditions should occur to make one accountable for his or her actions. If at least one does not occur, then one is not accountable for his or her actions. Consequently, in the case of the two excusing conditions, ignorance and lack of intention, it is sufficient that only one condition does not occur to excuse one from accountability. We have two examples here. Suppose someone suddenly holds and moves your hand, which then causes you to spill your coffee on somebody's laptop. You are not accountable for spilling your coffee on this person's laptop, for it is not your intention to do it. You presumably know it to be wrong, but since you do not intend to perform them, then you should not be blamed for it. In this case, the knowledge condition occurs, but not the intentionality one. On the other hand, suppose a child mistakes a real gun for a toy gun and then shoots a person. Assuming that this child is of an age where he is not yet capable of discriminating between a real gun and a toy gun, and more importantly of knowing the immorality of shooting a person, he or she should be excused from any accountability for his or her act. And here the intentionality conditions obtains but not the knowledge one. Therefore, the child is not accountable. We earlier noted that if the knowledge condition does not obtain, then there cannot be any attribution of accountability. The absence of such condition or the presence of the condition of ignorance is one of the excusing conditions. But suppose a factory manager does not do preventive measures to protect the health of his workers from the hazardous fumes emitted in his factory, and as a result, many of his workers get seriously sick. Later on, when an investigation is done on the matter, the manager claims that he does not know that such fumes are hazardous. Can we say here that the manager is excused from accountability? Is this a case where the knowledge condition does not obtain? We obviously would think that he is not excused from accountability, for not only is he capable of knowing the effects of the factory fumes on the health of his workers, but as a factory manager, it is his duty to know such things. But how is it this type of ignorance different from the ignorance of the child who shoots a person using a real gun, which he mistakes for a toy? That case consideration calls for a distinction between two kinds of ignorance, which we shall call irresponsible ignorance and real ignorance. Irresponsible ignorance is the kind of ignorance where we can say to an ignorant person that he or she should have known better. Real ignorance is the kind of ignorance where we cannot say to an ignorant person that he or she should have known better. With this consideration, it becomes clear that it is only real ignorance that qualifies as an excusing condition. But what determines whether we should know better in a situation where we happen to be ignorant of something? The following questions are helpful. Do we have the capacity to know what we ought to know in a given situation? And given our role in a given situation, is it our duty to know what ought to be known in such situation? What determines one's capacity to know can vary depending on the nature of the given situation. It can include, among others, maturity, mental health, and access to relevant information. In our example of the child mistaking a real gun for a toy gun, we cannot expect the child to know better, or more specifically to know the difference between a real gun and a toy gun, especially if the toy looks exactly like a real gun, and that it is wrong to fire a gun at a person. And this is because his or her biological capacity to know such as information has not yet developed. Now the person who mistakes a real gun for a toy gun may be an adult already, but then he or she may be mentally handicapped. And here it is not that the capacity to know has not yet developed, but it is impaired. On the other hand, what determines one's duty to know is one's role in a given situation. Take again the case of the factory manager that we earlier talked about. Because of his role as the factory manager, he or she ought to know certain things about the factory, which should include whether the fumes emitted in his or her factory are hazardous to the health of his or her workers. If so, then his failure to know these things constitutes negligence of his or her duty to know such things. In this regard, his or her ignorance of the things he ought to know is irresponsible.